Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. Welcome to this conversation about 25 years of the Obermayer Awards. We have a great panel for you today. Really excited to talk about the last 25 years of this wonderful, wonderful organization. And yeah, should be a great conversation. My name is Stephanie. I am on the public history team at the Leo Baeck Institute. And I'll be moderating the discussion today. And there will be a Q&A at the end. So if you have questions throughout the talk, please put them in the chat and we will read out your questions at the end. To start out, I'd like to ask everyone to put their name in the chat and where you're from and your involvement with Widen the Circle or Leo Baeck Institute, if any. So our speakers today are Joel Obermayer, Karen Franklin, and Miriam Bistrovic. Joel Obermayer is the founder and executive director of Widen the Circle and the director of the Obermayer Foundation. Miriam Bistrovic is the director of Berlin operations at the Leo Baeck Institute and a juror of the Obermayer Awards. And Karen Franklin is the director of family research at the Leo Baeck Institute and was actually a co-founder of the Obermayer Awards. So Karen, I'll hand it over to you to tell us a little bit about LBI.
No, you're talking about LBI. You're talking about LBI.
I can talk about LBI.
Please do.
Leo Baeck Institute is a research archive and museum dedicated to the preservation and promotion of German Jewish history. So we do events like these, we put up exhibitions, we have an archive of containing hundreds, if not maybe over 1,000 years of German Jewish history. And we have a podcast, Exile, award-winning podcast. If you want to check it out, it's stories from our archives. And LBI is a longtime partner of the Obermayer Awards and Widen the Circle. So we're really excited to be talking together today. And Joel, if you want to tell everyone a little bit about Widen the Circle, that would be great.
I would be happy to. Thank you for your introduction, Stephanie. That was great. So my name is Joel Obermayer. I'm the executive director of Widen the Circle. Little correction, I am a director of the Obermayer Foundation. Several of my family members would be very unhappy with me if I indicated that I was the only one. But let me tell you about Widen the Circle, because that's really what most germane here. Widen the Circle confronts longstanding injustice, rooted in racism, anti-Semitism, and attacks on historic memory and democratic values in Germany and the United States. And we do that by empowering amazing local remembrance activists. These are people like our awardees that we'll be talking about today. These are people who expose legacies of persecution and use the legacies of lessons of history to bring together communities and to promote healing. And we have 3 programs. One is the Obermayer Awards, which we'll talk about today. The second is a network of activists, remembrance activists all across Germany that we have in Germany. And the third is a fellowship program that builds bridges between people who are remembrance activists who do this tough remembrance work in the United States, and also connect them to people doing that work in Germany. And that's kind of what we do.
Great, thank you so much. So I believe we have a film to show you all today in honor of the Obermayer Awards 25th anniversary. So we'll go to that and then we'll proceed on to the discussion.
Great.
My name is Arthur Obermayer, and I feel very privileged to have the opportunity to initiate the Obermayer German Jewish History Awards. These awards have been given to Germans who've done extraordinary work in preserving Jewish history, culture, and other remnants of the Jewish past in their home communities in Germany. I decided there must be some way of recognizing these people who do this all on a volunteer basis, just because they think it's the right thing to do. And that's how I initiated the Obermayer German Jewish History Awards.
In 1999, I met Arthur, and he asked if this kind of award will be important, welcome in Germany. And Mr. Führer was the president of Berlin Parliament, and I spoke to him. And he said, oh, yes, this sounds really good for us, so let us do it. And that's how we ended up in the Berlin Parliament.
when we started the awards, we weren't sure how long they would run. We didn't know how many people were doing this kind of thing. And we felt strongly that if there weren't really good people to award, that we wouldn't do it. We just thought. That never happened.
Meeting all these awardees has been a good lesson for me too, to know Germany better. I had no idea how many Germans helped, even after the war, to build the Jewish life again in Germany.
Was Obermayer noch besonders macht, ist, dass es die Weitsicht hat, die Bedeutung und die Funktion von Antisemitismus klar zu haben, auch für die Gegenwart. Diese Arbeit so anzufassen und so konkret zu machen und für jeden und jede, auch in den Vereinigten Staaten, deutlich zu machen, dass hier Leute sind, die sich damit wirklich tiefgründig auseinandersetzen wollen, ist meiner Meinung nach eine der wichtigsten Dinge, die wir überhaupt leisten.
I think it's really important to connect with local history. Once you see what happens in your own place, then it's very close to your heart. And I think that's what the Obermayer Foundation does so well.
The award itself has inspired others in the community. So we've seen in many cases where an awardee was alone in the work that they accomplished at the time they received the award, and then later others in the community joining in their efforts, learning from their work and wanting to participate in this memory of work.
Also es hilft einfach dem Projekt, wenn solche Preise verliehen werden und die Leute davon lesen. Aha, dann fängt man an zu denken, na ja, es wird ja doch eben offiziell anerkannt und es hilft sehr. Und irgendwo ist man natürlich auch stolz darüber, dass so etwas gewürdigt wird. So wie die Stolpersteine weitergehen sollen, soll auch der Obermayer-Preis immer wieder vergeben werden.
The award ceremony puts a spotlight on these people and gives them a voice. And this voice is full of love and compassion, and that it doesn't matter who you are or where you live, you can make a difference.
Wir haben uns unglaublich über diese Auszeichnung gefreut, weil es eben nicht nur eine Auszeichnung ist, die regional eine Relevanz hat, sondern eben international und man mit internationalen Partnern irgendwie in Austausch kommen muss. Diese Begegnung schafft dann eben die Möglichkeit zur Zusammenarbeit.
The awards provide a really important message, an important example about not just preserving history, but about opposing bigotry of all kinds. And what I see in the future, actually, is more people coming together, our awardees and others, in Germany, in the United States, people that I think of as remembrance activists, who can have an impact on these issues that we face right now.
So a network of remembrance activists is created. I have had the pleasure of observing Joel Obermayer build upon the legacy of his father. And through Widen the Circle, Joel has created a movement, a community.
What I really loved about the Obermayer Award was that they brought us together with our peers. What matters is that you continue to do your good work and believe in the future.
The whole point of the project is to give credibility to the people who've done a lot of very good work, but also to help next generation understand that it takes a lot of work to avoid these kinds of things. In order to fight them, you need to understand how they happen in order not to do it again. And you want to be able to reach down to the next generation or two and know that when you're not there are people working on these things and trying to make sure the world is a better place, which we really need right now.
Wow, I have so many questions after that video, but I think we'll just start with you, Joel. So one phrase that stuck out for me in that video is network of remembrance activists. And I wonder if you could speak in your own words about the importance of this work right now, and how this community, this network, has contributed to reconciliation and memory culture over the years.
Wow, Stephanie, such a small question. But no, that's
Just
fine.
to start with some overarching.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
major
So let me
themes.
talk about the history and then let me talk about now. So maybe this is one way that I think about it, which is that Germany did not reckon with its own past on its own, just by itself. It was a process that a lot of people had to be pushed into, really. And if you think about it, many of the sites and memory sites and memorials that we think about now in Germany that relate to Jewish history, like the Holocaust and so on, the vast majority of them were really started as a result of people on the local level, community level, who wanted to raise concerns and wanted something to happen. It really bubbled up from underneath. And even though sometimes people will talk about remembrance culture and how it is involved with the government and so on, it really started at the bottom. And the people who are doing that are really our awardees. And so in a way, kind of a key element to dealing with this past, at least to the extent it has kind of come through people like our awardees. So that's one way to think about it. Now, in current times, I have sort of a totally different way to think, because obviously right now, in some ways, what's going on is kind of a war against memory. Certainly that's what's happening in the United States, and to an extent it's happening in Germany also. And look, as an American, I'll just say that the authoritarian's playbook includes attacking memory, includes attacking history, and attacking institutions and individuals who deal with it. And I think we can see that all around us right now. So that's one key reason why this is relevant now. And I'll give it a second one, which is that, if you want to deal with anti-Semitism, which is a topic that we sometimes talk about with us, and certainly Leo Baeck does, if you want to deal with racism or prejudice or injustice of any sort, you have to be able to remember, because it tells you why, tells you why you want to address these things. And I would just say that that's another kind of element that you get by looking at awardees and the kind of work that they've done for the Obermayer Awards. So it's that's kind of a broad framing.
Great, thank you for that. I think that'll give us a lot to talk about. I just want to stay on what you said about Germany, and I'd love to hear from you, Miriam, as our Berlin representative, about the symbolism and importance of having the awards in Berlin as they take place in Berlin every year.
Well, as Joel already talked about, initially, all of those memory work wasn't done by the politicians, but rather on a grassroots level. So having those people who were often overlooked being recognized by a state representative in Berlin, where most of the press is gathering, was something new. And it brought to them also not only the acknowledgement, but the whole situation was recognized as what they are doing is valuable. What they are doing is being recognized outside of Germany and is important work. Otherwise, some people perceived their own situation as being some kind of David Goliath fight. So they've been running up the hill again and again, and nobody really recognized them in their own towns. Often they were frowned upon as soon as they started digging up what some people believed was that dirty history. But in fact, they did so much unrecognized but remarkable work in their hometowns. And without that kind of grassroots work on such a low level, which was done in so much detail, many of those memorials couldn't even exist today. And many of the research that has happened over the last 20, 30 years was not possible without all of those volunteers putting in their free time and all their efforts.
That's a very powerful image to think about, this all starting from the ground up and contributing to memory culture today. I wonder if you could tell us in the audience who may not know as much about memory culture in Germany today. Could you reflect on that a little bit? I know it's a big question, but.
Well, to quote Joe, what a small and nice question. No, I could talk about for hours, but I try to be as brief as possible. So Germany is being perceived as one of those countries that has really dealt with the past and is one of those forerunners for memory culture. But in fact, that's only a quite recent development. So I would say in the 90s it started, but many of those awardees were already picking up rubble, were already working on the ground, on cemeteries, writing down names in the 70s, 80s, or even 90s, way before this whole endeavor of memory culture in an official way started. And to think about memory culture, you also have to think about how countries are changing over time. For example, in Germany, memory culture was often targeted to a German-speaking native audience without any huge cultural differences. So by now, we have quite a heterogeneous citizenship in Germany. We have a lot of people who were not born in Germany or who have parents who immigrated to Germany, who have different cultural, religious backgrounds. And surprisingly, or not really surprisingly, but for most politicians, surprisingly, they are quite keen and interested in the history of the country they are living in. And they want to know more about it and are quite engaged in finding out more about the Jewish history in Germany, about what other people have already discovered, and more importantly, about their local history, because they feel connected to the cities or towns where they are living in. And that hasn't been recognized by official memory culture for many, many years. And it's just starting to change.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for telling us a little more about that. I'd love to go back to the beginning for a second and hear a little bit from Karen, one of the founders of the Obermayer Awards. In your words, how did this get started? What told you all that there was a need for this? And what was the original conception of the Obermayer Awards?
Thank you, Stephanie. And I'm so glad that we started with today, because it's so interesting now to look back and see how different the beginning was and what the initial concept was. Because initially, as I think most people know, this was started together with a number of people who wanted to acknowledge the work that local historians had done for their families, for remembering their families. And there's always been a tension between wanting to remember Jewish history in Germany and not just the Holocaust. And it was a very odd situation. No, don't talk about the Holocaust so much, talk about history. For a Jewish person to say that was quite awkward. But this really was the idea, to acknowledge history. And also, I was, just to respond first to what was already said, the concept of the awardees being recognized by the state, because in the beginning there was no recognition. So the idea that you were recognized by the families whose lives were recreated in the work that was done, this was the recognition they received. And in fact, we often talk about the awardees, but we have to remember that every year there were 20, 30 more nominations that came in. And for many of those people, we saw in all those years that just to be nominated was a tremendous recognition of the work and a connection with the many people who nominated them, so that this in and of itself was supporting what they did. And of course, later that developed to the awardee and his or her community, or when it came to later groups who participated, the group and the community. And from there took on this larger connection with the state government and international recognition. But originally, it was really between the nominators, who were, in many cases, genealogists, family historians, or descendants of the people who had lived in that village in the earlier period. So it began with Arthur's vision. And I apologize for digressing, but something happened to me 1 hour ago that speaks to the power of the award and the
No,
lives.
please digress.
Yeah, thank you. So I was, so the first year we honored a local historian. His name was Moritz Schmidt. He had done work in the town of Ischenhausen and done a history of the Gersley family going back to 1670. In the 1970s, early 80s, I built upon that work and wrote a book called 11 Generations of the Gersley Family. And the joke was that there was not a month that went by in the last 43 years that I didn't hear from a Gersley who was motivated, who was connected by that work, by his work and subsequently mine. He was honored the first year, by the way. He died in between when he was nominated and when he received his award. And his wife took a plane for the very first time to fly up from southern Germany to receive the award. But I digress. Okay, so I got this call from cousins who had seen the book. It was the first time I ever spoke to them. And this reconnection of family was due to the work of Moritz Schmidt. And so it really is true, not a month goes by, but it speaks to the power of what he did in the 1960s and the 1970s, that this connection with Jewish families, it wasn't the original intent of the award to connect Jewish families, but it was something that continues to happen as a result of this. So yes, there's recognition on a personal level, on a family level, and all by a community, and also in the international world for these people who receive the awards. Was that the question?
Wow, thank you. Oh, sorry.
Was
Thank
that
you
the
for
question?
that. Thank you for that story. It really gives us a sense of how all this has changed. I want to return to research and archives in a little bit, but first I want to just ask you, Joel, about how you got involved. And speaking of change, how you've seen the landscape of the work change over time since your involvement.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. So, the awards were really a project primarily of my father and people that he knew, like, for example, Karen and other folks at Leo Baeck. And for the first 10 or 15 years of the awards, I was aware of them, but I really wasn't involved. And it wasn't until 2014-15 that I began to get involved. And that was primarily, my father got sick. He was sick for about a year before he passed away. And while he was sick, one of the things that my family members and I really talked to him about was about these awards and how important these were to him. And we really made a commitment to him before he died that we were going to try and continue them, even though honestly we had no idea how to do it. And so he didn't leave an instruction manual or anything. And so for a few years after he passed, just having the awards at all was a really big deal for us. And what started happening was that I kept seeing little ways. I started coming to Berlin then, as did my brother, for example, and my mother. And I kept seeing little ways to improve the awards, things that we could do, ways to have more impact, for example, by bringing awardees together. Without really realizing it, I kind of got hooked. And at a certain point, I was doing so much work on this and the other things that became Widen the Circle. And I had a regular job, and eventually I just couldn't do them both. And I just, at a certain point, I decided that, I would always wonder if I didn't take this on in a more real way. And so I really began to do this work really in earnest in 2019. And I guess I've never looked back. I can't actually imagine doing anything else at this point. So that's how I got involved. And then you were saying the evolution, which actually kind of matches a little bit of my involvement. So I think of the awardees in kind of two flavors, if you will. One is what I would call more of a traditional style awardee, very similar to the ones that Karen is talking about. Somebody who started doing work in their own town, maybe a small town, or it could be a neighborhood of a city. One project leads to another, and pretty soon they've resurrected aspects of a Jewish community that is no longer there, connected to descendants all over the world. And those people both care very much about the history, and they also tend to get involved in issues around modern things that they see that kind of naturally would be, kind of fit with what their work is. So for example, issues of prejudice, issues of anti-Semitism, sometimes issues of supporting immigrants and other things, but they tend to get involved and get to be very active in those things. And the main kind of changes that we made were really twofold. One was really expanding to a second group of people who we began to see regularly, but we hadn't really seen, weren't as aware of them, which is we also have a second group of people that we already were seeing, but hadn't really looked for very carefully, whose goals were to deal with modern issues like prejudice and intolerance, but we're using the history to do it. And so like a classic example of that would be, Karen, a place that you know very well, which is something we call the Yellow Brick Project, which is a memorial wall that's been built for over 30 years by sixth graders at an elementary school in Berlin. And I know Karen knows it because generally she tries to visit them once a year. This is a project that was about its neighborhood, but also has a really major impact on how kids see the world and really can change their beliefs and deal with prejudice in a way. And so what we began to do was begin to look for more projects like that. And so if you look at the awardees that we have now, you'll see them, there's a lot of interplay between them, but you'll see, for example, some people come from little towns who are doing this kind of history work and again, get involved in these other issues. And for example, you may see a group from an area of Saxony where the far right is really strong that does good history work, but where the history work has a political dimension and they're actually trying to address prejudice in their own community. So I would say that's one key development. And the other key development is actually much more basic than that, which is that during the pandemic, we couldn't have an award ceremony. And so the question was like, what do we do if you can't bring people together to honor them? And our hypothesis was, okay, maybe what we should do is we should take all the resources and time and we should make films about each one and we'll show them online. Like that was our idea. And the truth is that those films allow you to see into the heart of an awardee and what they're doing and why it matters in such a deeper way. And when the pandemic was waning, we just decided we need to keep doing them. And the truth is that those films changed our relation to the awardees and honestly changed the popularity of the awards. And our audience has gone up 5 or 6-fold since then. And it's really become like a powerful piece of the experience, is really experiencing those people through film, but like being able to see their character and what they're like and the essence of them in a very, very direct way. And so I would say that's the other big change.
That's wonderful. It's such a positive and constructive light, the way you talk about this change. And you touched a little bit on the films, but it also, I mean, in thinking about how the organization changes, how their perception changes, how memory culture changes, I'd love to hear a little bit from Karen and Miriam about the role of the archives like LBI or other archives in documenting this evolution and in documenting this work for the next generation.
Miriam, you're welcome to begin if you like.
Totally fine with me if you don't want to start.
Either or both of our LBI representatives.
So I can speak to every year, part of the award application process, nomination process, is for the nominators to, or has been for the nominators to send in the material that they have produced. Usually it was books or videos or so on. I mean, today it's a little bit different with websites and so on, but this material, after it was reviewed by the jury, would be put in the Leo Baeck Institute archives. And over the years, we've recognized that this material will have extraordinary significance for future historians who want to document the culture of remembrance in Germany as we see who the people are. In the beginning, almost all the nominations, for example, were from Jews outside of Germany. And then all of a sudden we saw changes, such as there were groups. We added groups, not only individuals, because there hadn't been groups in towns and cities, but so we added to the awards that groups could be nominated. Over the years, there were other changes. They were almost all from outside Germany in the beginning. Now, many of the nominations are from local communities or local organizations, or in many cases, government agencies or individuals who are nominating because they're so proud of what's going on in their communities. So the documentation that we have from shows the changes and also documents the activities themselves. And we look forward to their use in years to come. It's a unique resource. And again, it's not just the awardees, it's all of the nominations that came in over the years.
Mm.
And going back to the question about archives, I mean, originally it was not possible to just go online and look into files. You had to go into small archives. You had to investigate where other parts of the collection might be, where some genealogical documents could be stored. And I would say the whole situation, for example, that the Leo Baeck Institute decided to go online and digitize our materials has been such a game changer for many of those smaller organizations and those individuals, because now they can just look into our files and see what has already been researched, can see what family collection is online and is being stored at our institute without paying many dollars in order to get to the United States, in order to stay in New York for 1 or 2 weeks, where one can only hope to find all those materials that you can just find with a click now. And by now, over 5 million pages of our collections are online. So it's a huge database. And at the same time, it's not only limited to our archive. Other archives started to digitize as well. And people started connecting through the internet, which is so natural for us nowadays, but hasn't been the case in the past. I still remember times in the 90s where people were using satellite telephones in order to reach somebody in the United States, and where letters took 1 or 2 weeks until they reached somebody, and then you had to wait again for the reply to reach you. So it was also tedious and also time-consuming work. And by now, you can just reach out via email, you can get in touch with somebody, you can Zoom with somebody, and get a connection so easily, which was something nobody could have done of in the 90s or early 80s.
Stephanie, if I can add, in my day, it used to be Morse code. No, just kidding. But one of the another one of the things that we offer, say at the Leo Baeck Institute, is the knowledge of who the awardees are, because the inspiration and the knowledge that they have about Jews who came from that area, or just general knowledge, historical knowledge, is immense, and they have material at their fingertips that you wouldn't find in archives.
And also due to the fact that you've been so involved over the past couple of decades, and we all know the previous awardees, people can reach out to us and ask if there's somebody in a certain area or a certain town who's already researching, and can reach out to them. So we can establish connections and really help to enhance the network, which Widen the Circle is all about. Building up a trusted network of people who are like-minded and who can really benefit from each other's knowledge.
Yes, it's such a wider network. I mean, I imagine the early years of the awards were mostly word of mouth. In terms of finding nominees. It's really interesting. It's really wonderful how these organizations work together. And just to get back to the awards today, I'm curious what makes an awardee or a nominee really stand out among all this amazing work that you see. So Joel, why don't we start with you, and then
Sure.
Miriam, and then Karen?
Sure. I'd be happy to answer that. I did want to say one more thing that I think is worth knowing, which is, when my parents first were involved, and Karen, when you were first involved with the awards, when my parents were first thinking about the awards, they really didn't think they would be needed for very long. They sort of thought the awards would be around for, I don't know, maybe 10 years or something. And the reasoning was they didn't think there were that many people doing this work. There were some, but they didn't think there were a huge number. And they thought most of them were older. And so as time passed, many of them would pass on, and there would be, that's what it would be. They thought Germans would be interested in it, but would sort of lose interest in these topics over time as we got moved farther away from the war years. And they thought that Jews in the diaspora and others internationally would become less interested over time. And what's interesting is that all three of those assumptions were wrong. And what's happened is basically the opposite. That we don't have less good candidates now, we have more. We don't have less interest in Germany, where there's actually much more, if you judge by press and other things. And there's not less interest among Jews in the diaspora and others, there's actually more. So just that's like a contextual thing. And then what makes a great awardee? I have a feeling that Miriam and Karen will have a slightly different view because they're both historian or historically oriented. But I would say, to me, my background was originally in journalism, and what captivates me about awardees is really their individual story and the kind of impact that they've had. And you can still, even though I mentioned that kind of traditional style of awardee, somebody working in a single town, you can still find candidates that are just simply amazing, even in that area. And I'll just give you an example. One of our awardees this year, a woman named Anya Liestman, has been involved in work in Fulda for many years. And you would say, well, okay, that's great. It turns out that the network of people, particularly Jews whose history she's brought back and the impact she's had on those families, is enormous. And we usually get, I don't know, maybe 10 or 15 individual letters from descendants or others related to one of these more traditional awardees. And in this case, the application came in with 60 of them.
Wow.
And many of them very, very profound. And I would just say, you can't help but be, moved by that. And then maybe I'll stop there. I have a few other things I could say, but let's hear from Karen and Miriam. I'm curious to hear their answers.
Well, obviously, the to be able to inspire others, I think, is one of the prime things that I look for. But I just compiled a list of some of our more unusual awardees over the years that I'd like to read, that gives you the dimension and depth that you can see in them. One was a judge who began presiding favorably over restitution cases in the 1950s and went on later to investigate the Jewish community in his area. There was one of our awardees they used to drive around on trash day in his neighborhood, and if they saw something in front of someone's house that looked like it might have been someone's attic being unloaded into the trash, they would peek around and see if there were documents that would be of interest for the archives. Someone wrote a guidebook for the cemetery for children so that they could learn how to find their way around the cemetery. The ones I looked at were people who inspired their own children, and their own children kept up relationships with the former residents. And one of our awardees, one of our favorites, went on and wrote a book not about Holocaust, but about the Jews who left in the 19th century, and then continued to talk about what happened to them in the 19th and 20th century in the United States, in America and elsewhere. We also, there were some who didn't receive the award, but did remarkable things. One took the concept of a Stolperstein, but wrote histories of the families that lived in an apartment house and mounted them by the door, so you could see that the entire history of the family, and on and on and on. But I guess the creativity and dimension of the ways in which the memorialization took place and the memory took place and the activities took place, I think for me is remarkable overall.
I can only agree. It's mostly about the passion and the impact. Nowadays, if you look at the awardees, often the sustainability, they find younger audiences, younger generations whom they inspire to continue their work, even if they cannot continue anymore. In the past, it was often so that many of those awardees had received the awards quite late in their life. So it was a lifetime achievement, which was honored. But at the same time, in those smaller towns, often no young people were around anymore to continue this work. And now, also as a side product of internet globalization and networking, people get connected. They see that there's somebody in a rural area who has such a treasure trove of information, of family histories, and they get interested and they find new ways to communicate that. And if I'm looking at a lot of those awardees, I'm always impressed and inspired by how many different ways they are existing to communicate historical facts. They are producing artworks, they are producing apps, they are getting in touch with younger generations and find new ways to communicate. And in a way, it's such a broad scale of historical and public history that's being created, which hasn't been the case previously, and which is so different from what people usually consider the typical historical pedagogical approach. And that's something that the Obermayer Awards really presented.
Can I jump in with another example or two? If that's okay,
Please,
Stephanie?
please.
So we see, as Miriam said, there's a huge range of what we see, particularly recently, of what the awardees are doing and kind of the activity. And I just want to give a couple examples that give you kind of a flavor of how much, anyway, what there is out there. So one is a group that it goes by the name of Tribe House, which means greenhouse in English. This is a group that exists in a little town outside of Leipzig, in a part of Germany where the far right is really strong. The AfD is the largest of the, Alternative for Germany. The far right party has the largest share of the votes in the most recent elections there, for example. And this group started there 20 years ago, in part because they wanted to create an alternative for kids who didn't want to be part of neo-Nazi gangs. So they literally didn't have a place to go. And the truth is, they, interested young people, and they started doing really good remembrance work about the little Jewish community that used to be in this town. They did projects that were around stumbling stones. They did various memorial things. They created a booklet. They did a whole bunch of stuff. And what's interesting about it is, for them, it is not merely remembrance. It is actually like a political act. Because the truth is that by doing this work in public, they show that their belief system is not the same as the neo-Nazis. And they actually attract, again, young people and others who have different belief system. And they've really become quite successful in creating this alternative in this little town. So a very different way of thinking about it. And another one that I just want to bring up, because again, it's very different. We don't have a lot of awardees who are Jewish. Typically, they're non-Jews in Germany, but there are a few. And one of them is one of my favorites, is a woman named Shlomit Tripp, who started, I see you smiling there, Miriam, so you know exactly what I'm thinking. Shlomit Tripp is a puppeteer. She started Germany's, I guess, only multicultural Jewish puppet theater. And she originally started this puppet theater in Berlin with the idea that she would create puppet shows about different aspects of Jewish culture that she would show to, Jewish families. But what's turned out is that actually the main audience she does these shows for, are actually non-Jewish. She does something like 70 shows a year. And the fact is that most Germans, because there are so few Jews in Germany, do not have a personal relationship with somebody who's Jewish, do not know about these Jewish cultural things. They may only learn about Jews in history class when they learn what happened in the Holocaust. And one of the things that these puppet shows do is really introduce children and families to these concepts, like who are Jews and what do they think? What are their practices like? In a way that's really positive and very lively, very vibrant, and just adds a completely different dimension to how they understand things. So I would just say there's really a very, very broad variety now.
Yeah, if I could just comment on another dimension, it's both new and old, and that is provenance research, which you made me think about, because we've had some recent cases where, not cases, that's provenance research case, but we've had a recent awardee, several who were who helped assist in provenance research, helped find objects that have been stolen to be returned. And I acknowledge Jeanette Rosenberg's presence here. She was one of the earliest nominators and participated as part of JURSIG, the research group on German Jewish history, part of Jewish Gen, the genealogy associations. And I'm reminded, Jeanette, that Gerhard Buck, who was one of the early awardees, the research that he did for genealogists in the town ended up as a very important element of a very early case that was published about provenance research for a Seder plate that had been thought to have been stolen. And so this was, it's not just recently the provenance researchers have been part of our work, it's also 23 years ago. So I'm done.
Wow. Thank you all for those wonderful examples. I'm really struck by the importance of storytelling in this work. Yeah, it's importance of storytelling, creativity. It's so much of how we think about our work at LBI as well. So thank you for that. I just want to remind everyone to, if you have questions, put them in the chat and we'll get to them shortly in our Q&A. And I have one more pretty big question for all three of you, playing on the theme of creativity, I'd love to know what your dream for the next 25 years of the Obermayer Awards is. So why don't we start with you, Karen?
I just want to quickly, I'll respond to the first part of that, and to Craig's question, where he's asking about those who don't win the award and what happens and what the nomination means to them. I think that's part of it. I tell the story that very early on, I was in Germany with a group, and we went to a cemetery, and the local historian was taking us around the cemetery. And he pulled this dog-eared letter out of his pocket, and it was a letter from Arthur Obermayer from several years earlier that he had been nominated for an award, and he carried around in his pocket. And when I mean dog-eared, I mean dog-eared. But just the nomination itself was enough to encourage him, to make him happy to be recognized. So, Craig, I hope that answers your question. And I'll leave the next 25 years to Joel.
I'm happy to jump in. Miriam, I'm curious what you'll say, but I'm happy to start. So I see continued kind of vibrant stories and building a network of awardees to more and more nooks and crannies in Germany. And I would just say, even though we talked about German remembrance culture and all those things, there's still plenty of places where change is needed. And, I can even think right now of a town where I think somebody who was at least in this event earlier, I saw her name, where, the powers that be in this town really do not want to remember. They really are discouraging projects and so on. And so I would just say that there's still plenty of work to be done. So the first thing is extending to more and more places in Germany. And I would say more communities, broader communities. And I both mean geographically, and I mean in terms of the type of people. And so I would just give an example that the Obermayer Awards, I think, will always have a direct connection to memory of the Jewish past in Germany. But there are other communities that were affected by Nazis and that have also been, affected over time, that have histories that need to be preserved. And I guess I would just say, I see that I think there'll be more connections to those things. And then the other thing that I really see broadly is that this will continue to be connected with a network of remembrance activists all across Germany. And I hope we will see more connection to remembrance activists in the United States. And what I really hope for the US is that we will end up with more of a national remembrance culture, which we really don't have. Maybe you have it in a few little places, but we don't have it the way we have, the way kind of broad. And I see these things coming together. So that's a lot, but that's what I'm hoping for.
Miriam?
So for an historian, nothing is more difficult than making any kind of prediction for the future. But at the same time, we are always surrounded by history. And most people just don't see it. And where I see the relevance of the Obermayer Awards is that they honor people who can make this historical sources visible again. They just know how to show it and to really reach out to a broader audience, to a younger audience, and show them that experiences of Jewish people living in Germany, be it 80 years ago, be it 180 years ago, are often quite similar to experiences that they themselves are encountering. Feelings of displacement, feelings of being discriminated against. It's not distant history. Many of those experiences are quite similar to things that are happening today. Of course, there are differences, yes, but knowing that all of this has happened and being aware of this history is what really is needed in order to shape your own understanding of history, of politics, of your own surrounding, and find your own place in your own society. And for that, I really hope for many more awardees with such creative approaches that we have seen in the past 25 years.
Oh,
If I could just respond to Joel, because something you said struck me so deeply, to have developed the connection between the remembrance culture and Germany and the United States several years ago didn't make any sense to me. But now that remembrance culture is threatened in the way that we work and has challenges that we couldn't have imagined several years ago, those connections become more important than ever.
Thank you all so much. It's fascinating to hear about, or to think about all of the ways that this impact can become even more expanded as we move into the future. Let's turn to some audience questions. This one speaks to what you were just saying, Karen. And the question is from Elaine, and it says, given what Joel said about building a US network, is there a non-financial way for us to help? So, Joel?
Sure. And this is in a way more in the Widen the Circle realm than probably the Obermayer Awards realm, because Widen the Circle does a lot of work in this direction. And I would say the number one way to get involved is to join us for events and be connected with us and help introduce us to other people you know. And I'd be happy to talk to you about how to do that. My 25-year goal, just to put it, is to have enough of a network in the United States so that we can actually connect people to individuals who are doing projects in different places. And I would just say we have some of those connections now, but it's not enough where we can just, they're in different places here and there. But I would just say start by connecting with us and connect us to other people that you know.
Wonderful, yeah. And Olivia would like to hear more about, Joel, your work in the USA that, I know you touched on this, but that connects it to the present day in the US with Widen the Circle.
Yeah, so I'll just talk very briefly. So the main way that we connect in the US is through a fellowship program that we run. And it involves a group, in fact, I was an event related to it this morning, and it involves people we call remembrance activists here in the United States. And these are typically people who work at historic sites or institutions that have kind of a community focus that are dealing with tough history and the legacy of tough history in the US. Let's say people are dealing with the legacy of the Emmett Till lynching in Mississippi, or the Underground Railroad in Pennsylvania, for example. And what we're trying to do is both elevate their stories like we do with the awards, and also connect them to others so that they can become more effective. And we've generally seen that kind of through this fellowship program, which is a year-long program, we've seen collaborations and impact that you would not have gotten ahead of beforehand. And I'm going to steal just another minute to give one example. One of our fellows from this past year is a woman who is based in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Her name is Christy. She runs a school that teaches African-American history on Saturdays that's not allowed to be taught in regular public schools. And when she came on our fellowship to Berlin, one of the places we go is a memorial to the book burnings that took place in Berlin in the 1930s outside of the university there. And while she was there, she said, this is going on in the United States right now. In my state of Oklahoma, there are 150 books that have been banned from libraries and public schools. One of them is the Diary of Anne Frank, which is true. And at that site, she said, I know what I should do. I think I should take what I've seen here, and what I should do is start a library of banned books. And so she now has a library where every single one of those 150 books that's been banned in Oklahoma, you can get there. And she's become an example for other people to do similar kind of work. And that really came from the example of her experience in Germany. So anyway, I hope that's not too much, but that's a little bit of a flavor of the kind of work that we're doing.
I think that's a wonderful example, and kind of leads us into our next question. Jeanette Rosenberg would like to know how we can continue to involve traditional genealogists in this work. This might be a question for Karen, who's a genealogist, as we know. And also Jeanette says that she is one of your relatives, Joel. Jeanette Rosenberg. So a little connection.
Wow.
So the question is, how are you reaching out to ensure that traditional genealogists don't get ignored in favor of the younger digitally native generations?
Joel, I'll leave that one to you. We still have in the awards program, it encompasses all of the areas that we spoke about, both the traditional awardees and some of the newer thoughts about organizations that move beyond that and deal with prejudice in a larger way. But reaching out, that's a really great question, because it's not just making the award, but it's encouraging the recognition in a larger way of those who do this work.
Let me, I'm just trying to think of how to address this. So let me start this way. My organization, Widen the Circle, helps run the Obermayer Awards, and its name, Widen the Circle, is that name for a reason, which is we're not trying to exclude people, we're trying to widen what we do. And Karen, I hope you'll appreciate this. When I first got involved in the awards, and Karen was the president of the jury, we had a lot of moments where we were wondering, and I think Karen was wondering, was there going to be a place for genealogists and other like really very traditional history work in the future of the awards? And you know, we tussled a little bit about it, but I think hopefully, Karen, you now understand, and I feel like I do, that you don't leave your roots. You know, the people who do genealogy work are kind of the core of where the awards came from, and some of the other things that we do. And so I don't think there's any thought in my mind that it's not a kind of a critical piece of this. And when we talk about, you know, working with younger generations and so on, it's more to build on top of it. It's not to replace it, I think. And actually, Miriam, I'm very curious if you know what your experience has been in this direction.
Looking back at the last 10 years where I've been closely involved with the Obermayer Awards, I would say that most of the awardees have in some ways been connected to genealogists, at least those who are not only working in an artistic field, but those who are dealing with stories, with families, with establishing the roots and really working on discovering or rediscovering the Jewish history of their towns. They need to reach out to genealogists in order to find out where those families have gone to, where the descendants could be found. And many of them did, as far as I know. Please correct me, Karen, if I'm wrong, but I had the opinion that many of those awardees that we met and that we've been talking to over the past 10 years have always been close to genealogists. Not all of them were genealogists, that's for sure. Not all of them were historians, that's also true. But the connections were there. And it would be quite surprising if they would not be there in the next couple of years, because genealogy is such a core topic when you're talking about family histories that you couldn't even do it without.
I just want to comment and thank you for the opening, because sometimes it's difficult to be a family historian because people do tell these long-winded, unrelated stories. And while you may have thought that mine at the beginning,
they are not unrelated. They are always related. It always takes a little bit more time to listen, but usually they are related.
Well,
Sorry.
the point of it really was that it was the reconnecting of the families itself, not just connecting to Germany, but to each other. That was the result of the research, and that is in its own way an answer and response to having left Germany and dispersing. That this offers us the opportunity to reconnect with each other as well as to the ancestral home, and that's one of the things that's being done by the awardees.
Wonderful.
One other thing with regard to the span of time and the connections, and that is that my family and Joel's family have been involved together in organizational life in Philadelphia for 100 years. So yeah, so to be able to continue to Tikkun Olam, to repair the world for 100 years together is for me a great blessing and honor.
Wow. Hopefully 100 more.
Yeah, let's definitely plan on that.
I just have one more question, which may be best suited to Miriam, but I'm sure you all can speak to it. Rachel asks, does anyone know of any German Jewish dialogue groups? She is a moderator of a group that's made up of Bavarian citizens and the German Jewish ancestors family from their town. So I'd actually love to hear about what that looks like and if that is a part of the awards at all.
Maybe I'll jump in first. So I suspect there are a lot of German Jewish dialogue groups out there. I wouldn't pretend that I have information about many of them. I more have kind of stumbled into some. My father was involved in a couple of them. I know a couple that have participants who are in the Boston area where I'm based that have been going on for 10 or 20 years. So they're people who know each other really, really well. I don't know of an umbrella group where you can kind of find out all about them, but for the questioner, I'd be happy to connect you to the ones that I know.
Can you speak to how they may have contributed to the Obermayer Awards at all, or that you know of?
Yeah, sure. So I would just say that people who are typically, these are descendants who, Jews who are descended from one particular community in Germany, and often it's current residents, although I'm sure there's many variations. These are people that typically are interested in a lot of the same issues that our awardees are interested in. And I would just say that there's probably more than one of these groups that has led to a successful nomination, an awardee, and that kind of thing. And I certainly know that my father was aware of that. I would say I don't have quite as many connections to them as he does, but I am aware that they have led to nominations and people and awardees and so on. And I'm curious, Karen or Miriam, whether you have any more expert knowledge than that, because mine's very anecdotal.
I would also have the question whether you are talking about German Jewish dialogue groups that are based in Germany, that are doing transatlantic work, or which kind of groups are we talking about? Because there are quite a lot.
It seems like the question is about based in Germany.
So there are a lot of different groups who have established German, which always sounds quite weird, but Christian German, Jewish German dialogue groups, or dialogue groups with Jews who originally came from the eastern parts of Europe. But at the same time, you could also say there are a lot of different organizations that are not necessarily dealing with the German part, but rather with the interreligious or interfaith dialogue part. Some of them are state organized, some of them are on a private grassroots level, and some of them are, for example, being organized by the Central Council of Jews in Germany, which is an umbrella organization for all Jewish communities in Germany who are registered communities.
Thank you so much for that. I think we'll end on that note. If any of you have final words, anything about what's coming up for...
I have an important final word, which is the next award cycle for the Obermayer Awards, for the 2026 Obermayer Awards, which are in January, actually has started now. In fact, it's already started. It started more than a week ago. And anybody who's interested in nominating somebody for the Obermayer Award, for an Obermayer Award, or understanding more about what it's about, feel free to come to our website, widenthecircle.org. That's widenthecircle.org. And I believe there's a banner on the top of our homepage. And if not, you can certainly go to our awards page and read all about it. I would just say we get our awardees in a range of ways, but one of them is through word of mouth in events just like this one. So if somebody on this call, I know there's several people on this call who have already nominated someone, but if you haven't and you have someone in mind, please be in touch. Thanks. Yeah, that was my thing. Go ahead, Stephanie.
No, thanks so much, Joel, and thank you all for your time and your knowledge. I think it was a great conversation. I learned a lot. Thank you to everyone for coming. And yeah, I think we'll end there.
Thank you.